Good evening, and welcome to the latest installment of Other Voices. I'm Ron Zucker. I'm a board member of Peace Action of San Mateo County. We are a co-sponsor, along with the Peninsula Peace and Justice Center, of tonight's webinar event. It was pretty much just 1 year ago the presidential election had kind of taken shape, and our speaker for this evening, PPJC's director Paul George, gave a talk about what was, at the time, still a relatively unknown planning document for a new Trump administration. Paul's talk was entitled Project 2025, the Right-Wing Blueprint for Authoritarian Rule. And with 2,500 people either watching live or watching the recording later, it became PPJC's most viewed video presentation ever. And now Trump is 100 days to the day into his second term in office, and it seems obvious that, notwithstanding his denials during last year's campaign of any connection to the 880-page or whatever document that describes Project 2025, it has indeed become a blueprint for his various executive actions. Some of you surely watched that video last year, and we're happy to have you back for the follow-up. As tonight, 1 year later, again, Paul returns to his examination of Project 2025. The talk is called, again, How's That Project 2025 Working Out for You? And we'll hear about what has been implemented and to what effect, and we'll look at what could still come from Project 2025's authoritarian planners. Paul George has been the director of the Peninsula Peace and Justice Center for 35 years now. He's been a grassroots activist since he was 16 years old, organizing against the Vietnam War. I guess we're kind of dating you, Paul, but that's pretty impressive. Along with all of his years at PPJC, Paul has worked on behalf of international solidarity groups, various election and ballot measure campaigns, and as a labor organizer during his many appearances on TV, radio, and in front of people. Paul has honed his skills at breaking down complex issues and figuring out effective ways to organize resistance. And tonight we will once again receive the benefit of that experience. And with that, I give you Paul George.
Well, thank you, Ron. I'm honored that Peace Action of San Mateo County wanted to co-sponsor this talk, and I'm grateful to you, Ron, for taking on the host duties for this evening. And thank you to all of you who have tuned in this evening. I'm also honored that you would take the time to be here. One little programming note before I get started. I have been down with the cold for the last couple of days. I seem to be finally throwing it off. I sure hope that's the case, but we may have a couple of unscheduled interruptions tonight. I apologize in advance, and I hope you'll understand. So my talk tonight will be an update, a progress report, if you will, about Project 2025. It will not be an exhaustive review. There's simply too much in Project 2025 and in what the administration has already done so far to cover it all. There's also, let's call it a wild card factor, and that is Elon Musk and DOGE. Elon bought himself a seat at the table long after Project 2025 was written, and so is not a part of it at all. But I'll try to factor in this wild card as best I can. I think we're all reeling from the whirlwind of activity that we've seen over the past 100 days as the MAGA regime rolls out its shock and awe campaign to utterly reshape our government, to undermine any semblance of checks and balances, and to consolidate power in the hands of one man, a malignant narcissist who is perfectly suited to take on the role of unassailable authoritarian. That shock and awe, the virtual fire hose of executive orders streaming out of Washington, is no accident, of course. It is, in fact, the reason why the Heritage Foundation undertook Project 2025, to be ready from day one to take radical and rapid action to institute their vision for the country and who should rule it. When I gave my talk on Project 2025 1 year ago, which was 7 months before the election, Heritage Foundation had already been at work on Project 2025 for over a year. It is no wonder then, with so much lead time, that they have been able to roll out the 130 executive orders so far, and they aren't done. I was able to give that talk 1 year ago because Heritage Foundation had proudly made their blueprint for authoritarianism available to the public. all 920 pages of it, at least in the PDF version. So a lot of us were able to take on the task of reading it for ourselves, analyze what it was planning, and then sound the alarm about what we had found. But the public nature of Project 2025 wasn't unusual, actually. The formal full title of the document is Project 2025 Mandate for Leadership. And it was the 9th such Mandate for Leadership report that Heritage Foundation has issued, one for nearly every election year going back to 1982. The Mandate for Leadership reports were always issued as advice for a new president, presuming the successful candidate was going to be conservative who shared many of Heritage's views. What was different this time around was the inclusion of the term project. It was presented as a plan of action, not mere advice. There are a couple of other important differences from previous incarnations of the Mandate for Leadership that speak to this being a carefully laid plan to transform the political landscape. The first difference is the active inclusion and participation of over 100 other conservative right-wing organizations. That had never happened before. So Project 2025 was always intended to be much more than simply the Heritage Foundation's vision for this country. It was essentially a manifesto of the entire right-wing movement. That's a critical difference from previous years. It means that those 100 plus organizations have been laying plans for over 2 years, prepared to support the regime nationally and locally to provide the personnel needed to carry out such an audacious plan. That constitutes a powerful, well-organized, broad-based coalition that we find ourselves facing. The other big difference from previous mandate reports is the inclusion of a companion document. This is called the 180-day playbook. There has never been a playbook for the previous mandates for leadership. And unlike the mandate for leadership, the 180-day playbook has never been made public. Where the 920-page mandate for leadership is filled with ideological discussion and an outline of broad goals to the right-wing movement, the 180-day playbook is the action plan, the step-by-step how-to manual. In this case, it's how to overthrow the political order. Here are a couple of quick examples of what I mean by saying the 180-day playbook is the action plan. Current news headlines are filled with coverage of the regime's deportation efforts, especially the actions targeting Venezuelan immigrants. The administration has invoked the Alien Enemies Act, a law enacted in 1798, as a means to round up anyone with a hint of connection to the Venezuelan criminal gang known as Tren de Aragua. There is no mention of the Alien Enemies Act in Project 2025. We can probably assume its use came out of the 180-day playbook. In another example, Trump is imposing his bonkers tariff scheme under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a 1977 law. With the exception of a reference to it in a footnote in Project 2025, there is otherwise no mention of the law in the document. I think it's clear why there is a separate and secret playbook. The designers of Project 2025 no doubt anticipated that many, if not all of their plans were likely to be challenged in court. Why give your opponents advance notice so that they can prepare legal arguments? Keep in mind that as we gather here this evening, it is day 100 of the MAGA regime. That means we are only slightly more than halfway through the 180-day playbook. There is more to come. The 180-day playbook, secret as it is, provides an excellent window into the stark reality of the current situation. While Project 2025 was written by dozens of right-wing activists, many of whom, by the way, are current members of the White House team or have landed at other agencies, production of the 180-day playbook fell to one man, longtime Republican activist Russell Vought. It's important to understand who Russell Vought is and what he thinks, because he is the key to implementing Project 2025. Vought was a congressional aide, a part of the right-wing think tank and lobbying machine, and a campaign aide. He became part of the Heritage Foundation's lobbying team during the Obama administration. In 2016, he served on Trump's transition team, and later in the administration, rising to director of the Office of Management and Budget in 2019. During the Biden administration, Vaught founded the Center for Renewing America, an explicitly Christian nationalist think tank. In the new administration, he is once again director of the Office of Management and Budget, one of the most powerful positions in the White House. OMB, as it is known, is the largest office within the executive office of the president. Its main function is to assist the president in devising and managing the federal budget and ensuring that agency programs and policies align with the president's goals. The OMB also plays a crucial role in coordinating interagency initiatives and providing policy guidance. Last summer, two reporters for a British nonprofit called the Center for Climate Reporting got a meeting with Russell Vaught by pretending to be relatives of a wealthy right-wing donor. They secretly recorded their conversation with Vaught, during which Vaught claimed he and his team had already drafted hundreds of executive orders and regulations. Remember, that was as of last summer. And he specifically emphasized executive orders to implement the mass deportation of more than 20 million people as quickly as possible. In his writings and talks, Vaught views our present era as a, quote, post-constitutional, end quote, period. Those are his words. We are in a post-constitutional period. Why? Because the left has destroyed the original Constitution. He believes that thanks to the left, going back to Woodrow Wilson, power has been transferred from the president to the agencies, unelected bureaucrats, and civil servants. In other words, the deep state. And these agencies, he believes, are fully in the hands of a permanent ruling class of leftist elites. Permanent ruling class is his words as well. He calls on present-day right-wingers to, quote, throw off the precedents and be radical in discarding or rethinking the legal paradigms that have confined our ability to return to the original Constitution, end quote. So that's Russell Vaught, Trump's point man for implementing Project 2025. So let's now take a look at some of what he has managed to accomplish so far, and then look at what might be coming next. In the already accomplished category, I'm going to look at two program areas that have gotten a lot of attention, mostly because of the radical nature of the changes made. The areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the Agency for International Development, or USAID. There is probably no single topic addressed more frequently throughout Project 2025 than diversity, equity, and inclusion. The term appears multiple times in nearly every chapter. It is clearly a priority of Project 2025's authors. Pardon me a second. Dictionary definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, is, quote, organizational frameworks that seek to promote the fair treatment and full participation of all people, particularly groups who have historically been underrepresented or subject to discrimination based on identity or disability. The right-wing end quote. The right-wing definition of DEI appears in one of Trump's first executive orders, issued shortly after he was inaugurated on January 20th, entitled Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferencing. The opening paragraph of the executive order refers to DEI efforts as, quote, illegal and immoral discrimination programs. Illegal and immoral discrimination programs. The executive order goes on to demand the immediate shutdown of all DEI programs, offices, committees, and the like. By the way, included in this termination order are programs aimed at environmental justice and accessibility, in quotes. I guess wheelchair ramps represent illegal and immoral discrimination. Anyway, the order extends to all non-governmental bodies that receive federal funding and which maintain their own DEI and environmental justice programs. This includes contractors and grant recipients. This order is the basis for Elon Musk's so-called DOGE project, canceling thousands of contracts and grants. This Project 2025 inspired executive order, pardon me, also provides the basis for including DEI programs in the government's threats against universities, law firms, and nonprofits. The regime implies that these organizations could be investigated for discrimination if they keep their DEI programs, whether or not they receive federal funding. Karen Attiah, the Washington Post global opinions editor, wrote the following in response to the executive order banning DEI. I think it tersely sums up what's really at stake here. Here's what she wrote, quote, "Let's call this what it really is, resegregation. I don't mean resegregation in the sense of separate water fountains. I mean it in the sense that a Black woman would never even be considered for a federal job or a management position at a big company, the way it was in, say, the 1960s. It is not inclusion the Republicans want to get rid of, it's integration. If you think I'm exaggerating, just look at a post made by Darren Beattie, who was just named an acting Undersecretary of State. Quoting, competent white men must be in charge if you want things to work, he wrote on X, not 10 years ago, but in October, end quote. I highly recommend following Karen Attiah at the Washington Post. This attack on DEI illustrates why I said at the outset that the inclusion of a broad swath of the right-wing movement in Project 2025 presents such a danger. Near the end of January, Costco shareholders voted down a motion to end Costco's DEI program. The motion had been brought by a collection of right-wing shareholders inspired by the executive order. Shortly after the vote, 19 Republican state attorneys general sent a letter to Costco demanding to know why it continued engaging in, quote, unlawful discrimination, end quote. So it would seem that Project 2025's denunciations of DEI have evolved from political complaint to executive order to apparently being the law of the land. The MAGA regime is, in fact, trying to abolish DEI entirely, regardless of whether DEI is being pursued in the public or private sector. Let me finish this segment on DEI by noting some positive developments. Shortly after Costco's shareholders voted in support of the company's DEI programs and practices, the huge retail outlet Target did just the opposite. They dumped all their DEI programs. Back in February, when a national call went out for an economic blackout day, the organizers of the one-day boycott pointed out the differences in how Costco and Target reacted to the right-wing threats. People apparently paid attention. Forbes magazine reported that, quote, on blackout day, February 28th, Target website visitors dropped 9% compared to the previous Friday, and the Target app user traffic, representing the most loyal Target customers, was off even more, down 14%. By comparison, Costco experienced a 22% rise in web traffic, end quote. I think this tells us that targeted economic boycotts can be an effective form of protest and demand for change. The other bit of good news on the DEI front is that since Costco's shareholder vote in January, Apple, Visa, John Deere, Disney, Goldman Sachs, Levi Strauss, Pfizer, and Boeing shareholders have all overwhelmingly voted to reject anti-DEI proposals and to uphold DEI initiatives. Let's turn now to another area that has received a lot of attention recently, the destruction of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID as it's commonly known. You may recall Elon Musk tweet bragging about having just, quote, spent the weekend putting USAID through the wood chipper, end quote. Was that wood chipper part of Project 2025? As it turns out, no, it wasn't, not even close. USAID gets its own chapter in Project 2025 with a lot of recommendations, but shattering the agency and putting the few remaining pieces under the aegis of the State Department was not one of them. The recommendations that it did make were pretty much in line with the rest of Project 2025. complaints about DEI being a part of many of USAID's programs, complaints about having USAID pursue climate change programs, complaints about USAID programs that might allow abortions and family planning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the end, Project 2025 called for ending these quote unquote problematic programs and adding new ones, like programs focused on, quote, increasing USAID collaboration with faith-based organizations, end quote. There's also a section on branding. Oh, how very Donald Trump. Quoting from the document, quote, the next conservative administration should build on the Trump administration's branding policy to force the aid bureaucracy to fully credit the American people for the aid they were providing, end quote. And the document calls for the creation of a senior advisor for brand management. Initially, Trump's executive order about USAID, also issued on Inauguration Day, called for a 90-day suspension of foreign aid while programs were reviewed. A little over a week later, the agency was dead. Again, nowhere does Project 2025 call for the complete dismantling of USAID. So what happened? It appears Elon Musk talked Trump into the radical step of dismantling the agency. In an online conversation in early February with shining lights of the right Vivek Ramaswamy, Senator Joni Ernst, and Senator Mike Lee, Musk announced the dramatic step, saying, quote, it's beyond repair, end quote, and explaining that Trump had agreed it needed to be shut down. In a series of tweets posted while he was running USAID through his wood chipper, Musk called USAID, quote, a criminal organization, compared foreign aid to, quote unquote, money laundering, and called USAID employees, quote, an arm of the radical left globalists, end quote. Trump joined the pile on by stating the agency was, quote, run by a bunch of radical lunatics. So the destruction of USAID seems to be another example of Trump making policy decisions based on whoever he has most recently spoken with. Project 2025's 30 pages of recommendations for the agency were set aside on a spur-of-the-moment whim, fostered by a guy who has zero experience in foreign policy, let alone foreign aid. Not a word from Musk or Trump about the humanitarian benefits of the agency. And what's the net result of shutting down USAID? USAID is the world's largest single humanitarian donor. In fiscal year 2023, the U.S. dispersed $72 billion of assistance worldwide on everything from women's health in conflict zones to access to clean water, HIV and AIDS treatments, energy security, and anti-corruption work. It provided 42% of all humanitarian aid tracked by the United Nations in 2024. It had 10,000 employees worldwide, a staff which will be reduced to fewer than 20 people as it is converted to a new office within the State Department. The negative impacts on the world's poorest people is difficult to comprehend, but statistical analysts who have pored over the numbers say the closure could lead to some 25 million otherwise avoidable deaths over the next 10 years. I'm not sure exactly how that is going to help the American brand. The attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion and the dismantling of USAID represent two of the major goals of Project 2025 that have been accomplished so far. As we saw, the goal regarding DEI was accomplished pretty much in the way Project 2025 proposed. The attack on USAID was the result of Trump and Musk spontaneously improvising policy on the fly. But Project 2025 had a lot more policy recommendations contained within its 900 plus pages. Lots and lots of policy recommendations. And a lot of them have been implemented so far, only to be contested in the courts. Currently, there are well over 100 lawsuits making their way through the courts, all of them the direct result of Project 2025's recommendations. Let's take a look now at what is still to come. I'm going to break these down as 1, policies that will require congressional action, 2, policies that will need to be resolved by the courts, and 3, policies that Trump can still impose by executive order or other powers of the presidency. Let's look first at Project 2025's recommendations that will require congressional action. At the top of the list are draconian changes in the Medicaid program. Now, we know the congressional Republicans are planning to drastically cut the Medicaid program in order to deliver their tax cuts to the oligarchs. But many of the proposed cuts come straight out of Project 2025. This includes cutting way back on the federal share of Medicaid spending and transferring more control to the states. And by control, they mean giving states expanded power to kick people off Medicaid or limit their ability to get on it in the first place. One of the recommendations in Project 2025 is to ensure that Medicaid recipients take, quote, personal responsibility, end quote, for their health care. That's code for imposing work requirements. Project 2025 also proposes a lifetime cap on Medicaid benefits that an individual can receive. That would mean, in many cases, that the elderly and infirm may hit their benefit cap while they are still desperately in need of medical assistance. We'll see when the legislation is finally written just how closely it will hew to Project 2025. I'd say it is very likely that Congress will go well beyond Project 2025's proposals. One other healthcare-related item from Project 2025, not surprisingly, it echoes the right-wing calls for a national ban on abortion, specifically calling on Congress to pass such legislation. Now, Trump campaigned on opposing a national abortion ban. He said over and over that he had returned the issue to the states, where it belongs, as he put it. The problem, as the authors of Project 2025 see it, is that the states, specifically their voters, aren't all falling into line. In the 2024 elections, 10 states voted on abortion measures that sought to affirm that the state constitution protects the right to abortion. Measures protecting abortion rights succeeded in 7 states: Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, and New York, and failed in 3, Florida, Nebraska, and South Dakota. So we may very well see an attempt at imposing a national ban come up in Congress sometime in the future. And one final Project 2025 recommendation, which would require congressional action, the proposal to close the Department of Education. This is a long-held dream of the right, especially the Christian right. They argue that various strings attached to federal education money are too burdensome. Some of those burdensome requirements include measures to protect against discrimination towards students of color, girls, and the disabled. Trump has already issued an executive order directing Education Secretary Linda McMahon to begin dissolving the department, and McMahon responded with plans to cut the department's workforce by half. The budget, which Trump submitted to Congress, contains steep cuts to the department's budget, but whether or not Congress will take action to actually close the department is an open question. Perhaps simply incapacitating it will be sufficient to their cause. Turning now to matters that will be settled by the courts, Project 2025 called for an end to birthright citizenship, the guarantee of citizenship to almost everyone born in the United States, which dates back to the post-Civil War era. This is another long-held goal of the right wing. While campaigning last year, Trump promised to try to end birthright citizenship. Shortly after his inauguration, he made good on that pledge, issuing his executive order indicating that people born in the United States will not be entitled to citizenship if their parents are in this country illegally or temporarily. The problem with the executive order is that it is decidedly not what the 14th Amendment says. The Supreme Court is scheduled to hear arguments on the issue on May 15th. 14th Amendment provides that, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside, end quote. It was intended to overrule one of the Supreme Court's most infamous decisions, its 1857 ruling in Dred Scott, which held that a Black person whose ancestors were brought to the United States and sold as enslaved persons was not entitled to any protection from the federal courts because he was not a U.S. citizen. The clear intent and meaning of the amendment was confirmed by the Supreme Court in 1898. Trump's lawyers will argue that children born to non-citizens who are in the U.S. illegally are not fully subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. They contend that this phrase implies a deeper level of allegiance and legal standing than simply being physically present within U.S. borders. Most legal analysts believe that Trump's efforts will fail. Another significant case working its way through the courts concerns the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, an independent agency responsible for consumer protection in the financial sector. The agency has returned an estimated $20 billion to consumers who were subjected to excessive bank fees, credit card late fees, and the like. Banks hate it, and it has been in the crosshairs of the right wing since its establishment in 2010. In this case, Trump is not trying to close the agency, as with the Department of Education, but the staff has been cut back drastically to the point that it cannot effectively function and complete its mission. The order came from none other than Russell Vought, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, whom Trump had just appointed as acting director of the Bureau for just that purpose. The National Treasury Employees Union, represented by Public Citizen, sued to stop the work stoppage. A federal judge issued a preliminary injunction against the government, and the case continues to wind its way through the courts. This one is also likely to end up at the Supreme Court, and it's going to have company when it gets there. Trump and Project 2025 have as a priority the desire to overturn an extremely important precedent that the president cannot fire the heads of independent agencies created by Congress. Trump argues that, as head of the executive branch of government, he has complete control of the executive branch, that Congress cannot restrict his interactions with an executive branch agency, and that the president can fire anyone in the executive branch for any reason or no reason at all. This is known as the unitary executive theory, that the president is unrestrained in his dealings with the executive branch. When Congress creates an independent agency, it routinely includes language in the legislation that the head of the agency, whatever agency it is, can only be fired for cause, that is, failure to perform their duties. Congress does this so that a president cannot undermine an agency's mission if he happens to disagree with it. There are currently numerous court cases focused on the president's ability to fire the heads of independent agencies. Should Trump prevail, there will be little Congress can do to protect the missions of the various agencies that it creates. It will take quite some time for these numerous cases to make their way through the courts, but the end result could be a major upending of how the government works and for whom the government works. There is one last Project 2025 goal that has the potential to be devastatingly groundbreaking. There are over 4,000 presidentially appointed positions throughout the federal government, with only about a fourth of those requiring Senate confirmation. But there are also some 50,000 positions that are deemed to be policy adjacent or policy advisory, and the people who fill those positions are career civil servants who are currently protected from politically motivated termination. Now, we're all well aware that one of DOGE's accomplishments has been the firing of some 200,000 federal workers. But those are not the people we're talking about in regard to Schedule F. The people who Musk fired, Schedule F is the proposal to rename these, reclassify these people. The people who Musk fired were lower level workers. Schedule F is aimed at decision makers, people who wield some real power and expertise in the federal bureaucracy. Musk couldn't fire them because their positions carry protections against politically inspired termination. Project 2025 would make all 50,000 of these positions vulnerable to termination at the will of the president. Trump actually took action on this idea during his first time in office. Toward the end of his term, Trump signed off on what was known as Schedule F, an order restructuring the civil service, which would have made those 50,000 civil servants vulnerable to termination by the president. But Trump's Schedule F ploy came too late in his administration to actually be put to use, and President Biden promptly repealed Schedule F upon taking office. But now Schedule F is back, formally resurrected by executive order on April 18th, just a couple of weeks ago. If this new Schedule F survives the inevitable court challenges, it will mark a major step forward in a MAGA quest laid out by J.D. Vance as far back as 2021 to, quote, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, and replace them with our people, end quote. When issuing the executive order, Trump said, quote, if these government workers refuse to advance the policy interests of the president, they should no longer have a job, end quote. It's his government, you see, not ours. Putting the interests of the president before the interests of the American people is pretty much the definition of Project 2025 and the Trump administration. Although issuing Schedule F is an administrative power that the president does have, the new Schedule F order is expected to be challenged in the courts, presumably by the 50,000 employees it would directly affect. But if the administration ultimately wins the day, we will be left with a government of, by, and for MAGA and Project 2025. So what can we do about all this? Everything we can. As I mentioned earlier, I think there is some real potential in targeted economic boycotts, seen as the first effort, as poorly organized as it was, showed some real documentable impact. If we can get panicked business people phoning the White House on our behalf, that would be great. Boycotts are hard to organize, but they can work. Just ask the African National Congress or the Farm Workers Union. But the most important thing we can be doing is what we have been doing, getting into the streets and making some good trouble. These national actions have been impressive, and they will only grow. Every time you go out on the streets, you are encouraging others to get out there and join you. This is how movements grow, and the resistance to Trump will grow. In every report about these street demonstrations so far, there are people quoted who say they've never been to a protest before. It's a kind of permission system. When you go out on the streets, others see that it's okay, that they aren't alone, that others feel the way they've been feeling, and that it's okay to express those feelings. As I mentioned, Trump's popularity ratings are plummeting. One of the late night talk show hosts said that measles is polling better than Trump right now. With each dip in the polls, more people are encouraged, given permission to protest his action. We can clearly see this effect in Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Fighting Oligarchy tour. They are drawing tens of thousands of people in red states and in rural areas. 10,000 people turned out in Montana, of all places, 20,000 in deep red Utah, 30,000 in Colorado, in Lauren Boebert's old district, no less. As Bernie says at his rallies, quote, our job is to come together. Now, I don't have a PhD in mathematics, but I do know this, that 99% is a hell of a lot larger number than 1%. So if we stand together, are strong, are disciplined, are smart, I have every reason to believe deeply in my heart that not only will we defeat Trumpism, but we can create the kind of nation that we deserve. End quote. We can and we must and we will keep growing this mass mobilization. I can see the patterns emerging of mass protests, the same patterns that I've seen and been part of my entire adult life, gaining strength and momentum. It takes time. It always takes time. But I'm convinced that we will see levels of mass protests like we've never seen before. The stakes are far too high to be hesitant or timid. I'll close with a quote that has long guided me in my work. It's from Frederick Douglass, a 19th century American social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, statesman, and former slave. He said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will," end quote. Demand democracy. Thank you for your time. Now let's have some discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Paul. Quite a dose of food for thought, but a lot of what and a lot of good how. Um, and it's a republic if we can keep it. And so now
Yep.
it's time for our audience's questions. There are two ways you can ask them. Both have to do with going to the bottom of your screen. If you want to say it live, you go to the raised hand icon at the bottom of your screen, and you'll be told when you can unmute yourself, and I will call for you. Or if you'd rather just write in your question, go to the Q&A icon down there, and you'll see a space to type it in, and I will read it. In either case, Paul will address your question as best he can.
Oh. Well, we have a thank you note, but I don't see any hands up yet. But while we're
Thank you.
waiting, what's that?
Thank yous are something. Anyway.
Well, while we're waiting for people to come up with questions, I want to mention I didn't work this into my talk because I wanted to keep it under 4 hours, but there are a couple of interesting things that are not in Project 2025 that you might guess were in there. And one of them is Greenland. Now, they mention Greenland. They mention its mineral wealth. And their suggestion, rather than taking it over, as Trump has been saying, is to set up a consulate there so that we have better contact with the people in Greenland.
Great. So we have a couple of questions that are written. One is from Sally, and it is, do you think this will come to violence or
Not
whatever
on
was
our
going
side.
on?
Not from our side, but I do think there's a high potential for continued violence, maybe against protesters, but more against judges. The state of the state of fear that judges are living in these days is just incredible, and these are real, honest threats of violence. And now the violence is coming from the FBI as they arrest judges for running their courtrooms properly. So I'm afraid that violence is a major part of the MAGA movement.
Okay. Next, we have a question from Jennifer. She is asking, what action can one take if they are too frail for protests? We can't always get out on the streets and Jennifer either is or knows somebody who maybe is in that category.
Sure, there's lots you can do. The first thing I would suggest is because a lot of this first line of defense against what Trump is trying to do is going to be taking place in the courts. You could help support and donate to some of the organizations that are on the front lines. I mentioned Public Citizen is going to court for the Treasury employees. And ACLU, of course, is on the front lines. And there are several other major legal outfits that are doing all this work pro bono, and they could use contributions. One of the things we do on Other Voices is send out a follow-up email with follow-up suggestions like that. So we will include, where you can direct some legal aid funding. The other thing you can do, of course, is contact your members of Congress, whether they're Republican or Democrat. If they're Republican, tell them to stop. If they're Democrats, tell them to do more. You can write letters to the editor, write a lot of them. Letters to the editor, a lot of people don't know this, but letters to the editor are the single most read section of any newspaper. People do read them. It influences opinions. It's even better than being out on the street with a sign because you get to say more. So there's just a few suggestions that you can do if you can't get out on the streets.
Okay. We have a spoken question. This is from Lynn. Unmute yourself, Lynn, and we'll hear from you.
Yeah, hi,
Hi,
Paul.
Lane.
What a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Apparently, there's some Democrats working on articles of impeachment, including our Congress member, Sam Liccardo. Now, I don't know if it'll go very far, but people are really getting on the new vice chair of the DNC is actually mounting a $20 million campaign to replace the Democrats who aren't doing anything, who are just standing back and not protesting. And so they're working to get those people, Democrats, unseated. Another thing that I've been doing through our revolution is calling the members, Republican members of the health committees of Ways and Means and Commerce, and with the statistics of how many thousand people would be affected in their district if they cut Medicaid and the SNAP program. And apparently they want to also kill school lunches. Uh,
Yeah.
So I I read your emails all the time and all you got, what you were doing. Um, I,
Well, thank you, Len. And those are all good items that you listed. There is a lot of good activity going on. I don't hold out much hope, obviously, with the Republicans in control of both houses of Congress. I don't think impeachment is going to go very far. And you mentioned David David Hogg, who's the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, uh, promising to primary Democrats who are being weak on this. And one of the first people that they announced, and I'm drawing a blank on her name right now, but he put her on the list to be primary. The next day, she introduced articles of impeachment. It was simply a way to fend off the criticisms coming from the progressive left. So I'm not saying that Ro Khanna is doing it for that reason, but some of these Democrats are signing on to impeachment so that they can show their constituents they're doing something. They aren't. Maybe after the midterms, we can look at that again if the Democrats take really strong control of both houses. But in the meantime, I don't think that's a strategy to try to rely on. But thanks again for the questions and the updates on what's happening out there.
Okay. You have a couple of typed questions. Next one comes from Alfredo. He starts off quite appropriately, muchas gracias, Paul. And then he says, what do you think we could do to stop Trump from sending people to El Salvador?
Uh, I wish we could just stop. Um, Alfredo, I still would like to have you on Other Voices to talk about what's going on in El Salvador. Alfredo was a longtime member of the board of directors of the Peace and Justice Center. He's from El Salvador, and I'll always remember when he found out that the Peace and Justice Center legally is a corporation, a nonprofit corporation, but legally a corporation. He said, wait till I tell my father in El Salvador that I'm a member of the board of a major American corporation. But I think this one it's going to be up to the courts. The thing to remember is the Supreme Court has already ordered the administration to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return. There there are also with the Venezuelans who are being deported. I forget the exact number, but it was something like 230 lawsuits, habeas petitions, and things like that are happening. So it's gonna that's one definitely for the courts, and the Supreme Court kind of punted and went gently on the first one, their first ruling on these deportations, and that was only on Abrego Garcia. I think we need to see a strong pushback and a clear decision from the Supreme Court regarding the unconstitutionality clearly. I mean, these are clear violations of the Fourth and Fifth Amendments and of due process. And now you have the president and the vice president openly proclaiming these people don't deserve due process. That is the whole basis for our democratic system, is that we all get due process. I'm encouraged by how strong the responses have been from some of the federal courts so far. One of the best was written by a Ronald Reagan appointed federal judge who just lambasted the administration and the lawyers who came into court to defend this action. So there's a very strong record favoring ending this policy. They have the issue of using the Alien Enemies Act hasn't even been reviewed yet. We're just dealing with temporary restraining orders to get these people back and give them some due process. But that really does seem to be a case where I don't see where a lot of grassroots pressure can help. I mean, we need to let our Congress people know that we're extremely concerned about this. But this one really is going to be resolved in the courts, I think. And thanks for the question, and thanks for tuning in, Alfredo. Mi amigo.
The next question is also typed in. Then after that, we'll have the spoken one. But this was from Alex, more or less suggesting or wondering about the possibility of a public website or web page with a collection of right-wing arguments and then left-wing counter arguments, talking points to counter some of those. For cases, these would be for cases when a smart person who's really not in Trump's camp but still defends perhaps some of his actions, and trying to deal with people's opinions when they come from the right point of view, the right side point of view.
Well, it's a nice idea. I wish we could overcome the information and disinformation problem that we have these days. Social media has really transformed the media landscape. And the right-wing echo chamber is a powerful, powerful thing. So, I like the concept. I don't think a simple website would do the trick, but we do need to find a way to keep putting out the truth about what's going on and rebutting their positions. Whether that will influence anyone, I don't know. I'll keep thinking about that. That's an interesting suggestion.
The next question will come from Mike, and we'll hear him. Unmute yourself.
Okay.
Hey,
Yeah,
Mike.
as I recall, how you doing, Paul?
All right.
As I recall, a chunk of the 2025 book of recipes, I guess you could call it, was talking about actually increasing military spending. I don't know if you came across that. I certainly did not read this 900-page horror story. But to me, that's like, if anyone's serious about saving money for the government, half your taxes go to things military. And what are we doing with it? Well, we're getting in trouble by not stopping genocides in Gaza and being accused by the rest of the world as being a force for evil. And the Ukraine thing is stumbling along, I guess. But the idea of threatening China constantly. So I'm just wondering, and I do applaud some of the people who actually have made the effort. There was a woman named Gail, I won't tell you last name, took Ready Wheels from Menlo Park up to our weekly vigil in front of Kevin Mullen's office at 11:30 on Saturdays, and then took Ready Wheels all the way back. I mean, it was just stunning. But I'm not recommending people do things like that, but it just shows the commitment of some people. I'll leave it at that. And thanks again for the terrific event. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks again to Peace Action in San Mateo County for co-sponsoring this tonight. You've helped with our turnout, and we always enjoy working with you guys. I will admit I did not go back and reread Project 2025 this time around. Once was quite enough. Although I did review my notes, and I don't think, I don't recall, in terms of the Defense Department, specific recommendations for spending levels and things like that. The recommendations for the Defense Department were more like what Pete Hegseth has been doing, and that's trashing DEI, kicking trans people out, or trying to kick trans people out of the military, and stuff like that. It was more of this culture war stuff at the Department of Defense, rather than specific budget figures and things like that. So I hope that answers your question. In terms of Ukraine, by the way, this is another thing that did not appear in Project 2025. It does appear, but just in a few paragraphs where they admit they don't have consensus on the issue. I think if it had been written today, Trump's views of Ukraine and Russia might have been a little more prevailing, but they just didn't come to a conclusion on that. Same thing with the tariffs. They did not, Project 2025 did not recommend this tariff regime. Peter Navarro, the tariff king, wrote a section proposing the tariff regime that we're now looking at. But there was another economist, and I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, who wrote an entirely other section opposing that and taking a more traditional conservative international trade kind of position. You know, conservatives have for long been free traders, and now they're not, thanks to Trump.
Okay. Well, we're coming right up on 8 o'clock. I fear, unless
Well,
you want.
let's go for, we've got somebody with a hand up there. Let's
Yeah,
get
okay. We got a
Theo
couple of
on
written
there.
questions that have been out there for about 15 minutes or so. We had somebody who's anonymous, who asked if Project 2025 had said anything about possible declarations of martial law.
No, I searched specifically for Insurrection Act and the like. There is no mention of that.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah. This could be a quick question. Do you think Musk is on the way out?
Yes, and it's a case of self-preservation, I think, is why he's on his way out. His brand, speaking of brands, is getting brutalized. These Tesla takedown demonstrations have really done what they were hoping. And the Tesla's earnings reported earlier in the month for the first quarter were just abysmal, just abysmal. So he's gonna, I think you've already seen, he's not in the news nearly as much as he was. He is backing off because of his brand. That doesn't mean the work is stopping. It just means Musk is not showing up at federal agencies wearing his tech support t-shirt. He's trying to pay attention to Tesla and probably SpaceX and getting the next round of government subsidies rather than trying to be on the front page of the newspaper every day. So yes, I do think he's backing off, but that doesn't mean DOGE is backing off. Good question.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Joan, for that. And this one's from Paula. How do we hold Trump to account for his lies regarding his ignorance about Project 2025 during the campaign? And a follow-up, what will make a difference to counter his lies?
Well, that's kind of, you know, why we're here tonight, kind of what I outlined is, we need to stay in the streets. Accountability for Trump will come when he's out of office, whether it's through impeachment, resignation because the country is up in arms, um, something along those lines. Uh, I think it was clear last year when he was campaigning that he was lying about his relationship to Project 2025. It's probably one of the least impactful lies that he's told. I mean, there are so many. Which ones do you hold him accountable for? But I appreciate the sentiment of the question. What we need to do is hold him accountable for everything he's doing to this country. And I do feel that day of reckoning is coming. Ron, why don't we go to one last microphone question
Okay.
with Jill,
Yeah,
and
I
then,
see
and
that's
then
there.
we'll wrap
Jill,
it
why
up.
don't you go ahead? And you'll need to
Hi,
unmute there.
hi, yeah, no, hi. Thank you so much, both of you, for this presentation. I'll just get to this quickly, and I also put this in the written questions. I'm a big believer in talking points. Someone else mentioned that earlier, and I've actually created a list of what I feel are short, punchy, but I believe powerful talking points that I really, really wish I could get the attention somehow of the DNC to feed to their candidate, the Democratic candidates, and even to some of the legislators. I'd like to know if you have any ideas of how to do that. If I feel like that would be, I mean, that's something Trump is pretty good at, and that's part of the reason he's president. He's good at marketing himself.
He sure is.
Um, and if we come, there's so many talking points that are quick and to the point, and I think powerful that would work. I mean, it would almost work if Fox News repeated them, which they probably won't. But I mean, you know what I mean? How do I get talking points out there? How can I mean, I have no hope in the DNC, no faith in the DNC leadership, but do you have any ideas?
Well, here's what I'll suggest for tonight at 8:04. Send them to me,
Okay,
and I'll work with you. I'll see what you've got, and let's try to figure out something together. You
that
can
sounds
e
great.
you can email me, and this goes for anybody out there watching. Love to hear from folks who attend these webinars. My email address is paul@peaceandjustice.org. Paul@peaceandjustice.org. Love to hear from you.
Okay,
And
thank you so much.
thank you. Thanks for all the great questions. Ron?
Indeed. I guess I just want to mention a question. We probably have run out of time for questions, but somebody said, please comment on the threat that the 2026 midterm elections will not be free and fair. That sounds like a whole other meeting in and of itself. And
It
so we may
does.
just
It
get to
does.
that.
Thank you for the suggestion for another Other Voices episode. We will take that one up. What's behind that question is absolutely right because they've got the SAVE Act going through Congress, and there's all kinds of ways that they're going to try to. They've already been doing this for years in fiddling with the elements of democracy, and we can expect a full court press in next year in the midterms. So that's right on point, and we'll address that as Ron says in a whole other program.
He's had meetings like that with Peace Action of San Mateo County,
Yeah.
so I know he's capable of that. And so I guess we had just a few more questions than we had time for, and we gave you the email. Please feel free to email Paul, paul@peaceandjustice.org.
And I will have the questions that didn't get answered, and I will look through, and I've got everybody's email address. I will answer them offline.
Okay. Okay. Any other final thoughts, Paul?
Just the fact that, it is a very depressing and scary time right now. But the history of this country, the history of the progressive movement has been one of it's slow and steady, but kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This time around it has constituted a gigantic step backwards, but we keep pressing forward, and I think we will come out of this maybe with an even better democracy than we had before Trump came on the scene. I sure hope so. It's worth fighting for. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate the great turnout here. I'm just tickled pink. So thank you all for coming. Ron, thank you again for taking the hosting duties.
Thank you again, Paul, very much for your insights. And thanks to David Simon for his technical expertise in putting this all together.
Yes, thank
And
you, David.
And we look forward to seeing you all in future editions of Other Voices. Watch your inbox for the next one in a month and 2 months and 3 months and so forth.